Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. If you're new here, this is the channel where men who crossed an ocean chasing a second life come to tell you, plainly and in their own words, what it actually cost them. Some of these stories are warm. This one is not one of those, but stay with it, because it matters. The man you're about to hear from is named Clyde. He's 51 years old, from the American Midwest, a scaffolder by trade. 30 years of steel pipe and wooden boards on other men's building sites. Up in the cold, up in the wind, hands like old leather. He never married. Never quite learned how to talk to a woman without going red to the ears, if he's honest with you. And he will be honest with you. He had a little money put by, more than a little, and one day he decided he was done being cold and quiet in Ohio. He decided he was going to burn the whole thing down and start again somewhere warm. I'm not going to tell you how that turned out. That's his to tell. But I'll say this. He told us at the start of our talk that he would never go back home, and by the end I understood that he meant it in more ways than one. Before he begins, do me a favor. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I'm always amazed at the map of you. If you've lived a version of this yourself, share it down there, because somebody scrolling past needs to read it. And if these stories mean something to you, hit like and subscribe so we can keep making them. Here's his story, in his own words. I want to start by saying, I'm not a stupid man. I know how this is going to sound. A middle-aged fella from Ohio with a bank account and no wife flies off to the tropics and gives it all to a pretty girl half his age. You've heard it. You've probably laughed at it. I would have laughed at it too, 4 years ago. So just keep that in your pocket while I talk, all right? Because every dumb thing I did for a reason that felt like a good one at the time. I'm from Zanesville, little city in Ohio, on the Muskingum River. Nothing you'd have heard of. My dad worked at the pottery works till it closed, and I went into scaffolding at 19 because a guy at church knew a guy. That's how everything happened in my life. A guy knew a guy. I put up scaffold on power plants and grain silos and the sides of hospitals for 31 years. Good money, honest work, and it near about destroyed my knees and my shoulders both. It's a strange trade, scaffolding, if you've never thought about it. You build the thing that lets everybody else do the real work, and then you take it down again and there's nothing left to show you were ever there. No wall you can point to and say I built that. Just steel pipe and clamps and boards, up in January wind that'll take the skin off your face, 40 feet over a frozen parking lot in Toledo. Your fingers gone so numb you're checking them to make sure they're still on your hand. I was good at it. Careful. 31 years, and I never dropped a man and never fell, which if you know the trade you know is a kind of miracle. But it's lonely up there. You'd think a crew is company. And it is. In the daytime, all the ball busting and the coffee out of a thermos. Then 5 o'clock comes, and everybody's got somebody to go home to, and you've got a truck and a microwave. I got used to that the way you get used to a bad knee. You stop noticing it hurts until somebody asks you to run. Never married. I'll be straight with you about why, because it's the whole root of this thing. I was shy, not cute shy. The kind where a woman would talk to me at a bar and my ears would go hot, and I'd say something wrong and just leave. I had a couple of girlfriends in my 20s. Nothing held. And then you blink and you're 45, and everybody you grew up with has grandkids, and you're eating a hungry man dinner over the sink watching the Browns lose. That was me. 51 years old, single, quiet. My whole social life was the crew and the diner. Then both my folks went inside of 2 years. Dad first, heart, then Mom, cancer, and I nursed her through the end of it in the house I grew up in. Those last months with my mother, I'd come home off the scaffold at dark and sit by her bed, and she couldn't hardly talk near the end. But one night she got clear for a minute, and she took my hand, and she said, "Clyde, I'm sorry you never found anybody." Just like that. Not you'll find somebody yet, none of that. I'm sorry you never found anybody. Like it was already over and settled. And I said, "Don't worry about me, Ma," and I meant it to comfort her. but driving to work the next morning it sat on me like a wet coat. My own dying mother's last worry was that I was going to be alone, because she knew me. She knew I'd never fix it myself. And she was right. Left to my own devices, I'd have died in that county without ever once being somebody's whole reason to come home. When she passed, I was standing in that kitchen, and I realized there wasn't one single reason left for me to be in Ohio. Not one. My whole life had been showing up for other people, and all of them were gone or moving on. The house was so quiet after the funeral. I'd never noticed how quiet a house could be until there wasn't even a sick woman breathing in the next room. Just the furnace kicking on, and the refrigerator humming, and me, 50 years old, in a recliner that still had the shape of my father in it. So I sold it. All of it. My folks' house went for $130-some thousand. My own little place across town went for another 60 and change after what I owed on it. Cashed out a chunk of my retirement, took the tax hit, didn't care. When the dust settled, I was sitting on about $165,000, free and clear, and no home and no family and no idea what to do with myself. That's roughly 9 million pesos, though I didn't think in pesos yet. That came later. Everything came later. I found the Philippines the way a lonely man finds anything now, late at night, on a laptop. There was a video, one of those retire abroad on $1,000 a month things, and it showed a beach and a market, and these people smiling, and the fella said something like, "Over there they still take care of each other. Family means something." And that word just went into me like a splinter. Family. I didn't have one anymore. Maybe you could go somewhere and buy your way into feeling like you did. I know how that sounds now. I'm telling you how it felt then. I made a profile on Filipino Cupid a week later. Didn't even put a good picture up. And that's where I met her, and that's where the money started to move. And I didn't feel a single one of the first dominoes go over. That's the part nobody warns you about. It never feels like the beginning of a mistake. It feels like your luck finally turning. Her name was Marilu. 34, from a barangay outside a town called Valencia, up in the hills behind Dumaguete on the island of Negros. First thing she ever wrote me was that my profile looked lonely, and she hoped I was eating enough. That's it. Not, "Hi, handsome," not, "You rich?" She asked if I was eating enough. And I sat there in my empty house in Ohio and read it about 4 times. She wasn't a stunner in the way that would have scared me off. Pretty sure, but ordinary pretty. A gap in her front teeth she was shy about. Worked behind the counter at a Mercury drug in town. She had a daughter, 7 years old, from a marriage that she said had ended bad. Her husband had run off to Manila years back and left her with nothing, she said, and no way to divorce him because, and this was the first thing I learned about that country, they don't have divorce, only annulment, and that costs more than she'd see in 5 years. So she was stuck, married on paper to a man she hadn't seen in 6 years. I felt sorry for her. Course I did. We talked every day. And I mean every single day, for months. Good morning texts before her shift, video calls at night. My night, her morning, the time zones all backwards. She'd prop the phone up while she cooked rice and just talk to me. Show me the rain coming over the hills. Let me hear the roosters and the tricycles and some neighbors karaoke murdering a Whitney Houston song. I'd never felt so present in somebody's actual life. I learned that whole country through a phone screen before I ever set foot in it. She'd take me to the wet market on a Saturday, walking through with the camera turned around, and there'd be the fish laid out on ice, and the tuyo drying, and the woman selling little bags of calamansi, and Marilu would haggle over a kilo of bangus in Visayan, this language I couldn't follow a word of, and then flip the camera back to her face and translate, and laugh. She showed me her Mercury drug, the counter she stood behind 8 hours a day, the fluorescent lights and the shelves of Biogesic and Bear brand milk. She wasn't selling me a fantasy of the place. She was showing me her actual small, hard life. And that's exactly what made it feel true. A scammer, I figured, would show you beaches. She showed me her feet after a double shift. My days in Ohio were gray and empty, and then at night this whole warm, loud world would open up on my screen. I started living for it. The first money wasn't even a request. That's what I want you to understand. Her daughter had a school project, needed a poster board and some things, and Marilou mentioned it the way you mention weather, not asking for anything. And I said, let me send a little. She said, no, I couldn't. I insisted. It felt good to insist. It was maybe 2,000 pesos. $36. She sent me a photo of the kid holding the finished poster, grinning, gap-toothed like her mama, and I swear to you I felt more like a father in that moment than I had ever felt like anything. $36. That was the price of the hook, and I bit down so hard. After that, it got easier for both of us. She'd mention things. The electric bill, her mother's blood pressure medicine, the fare to get to the city, and I'd send a little through GCash, this phone money app everybody there uses. Never much. 500 pesos here, 1,000 there, $9, $18 at a clip. I did the math once, a few months in, added up what I'd sent, and it was already somewhere around 200,000 pesos across all those little transfers. Around $4,000, without one big number in the pile. Just a slow, steady drip I never felt leaving. And the thing is, none of it felt like buying her. It felt like being useful. Do you understand the difference, or how a lonely man could stop being able to tell them apart? Because I couldn't. Not then. I told myself I was helping a good woman who'd had a hard road, and every peso I sent she thanked God for. Out loud she'd say, "Thank you, Lord, for sending me a good man." And I'm not even a religious fella, but it wormed right into me. By that fall, I'd booked a flight. I told the crew I was taking 3 weeks. I didn't tell them it was to meet a woman in the Philippines. I was too embarrassed, still, even at 51. Some things a shy man never grows out of. I told them I was going fishing. I'll never forget walking out of that little airport in Dumaguete. The door slid open, and the heat hit me like I'd walked into a laundromat, thick and wet and smelling of diesel and salt, and something sweet. Frangipani, maybe. I didn't know the names of anything yet. And there she was behind the rope, with a little cardboard sign that said, "Clyde," with a heart on it, and the daughter beside her in her Sunday dress. And Marilou saw me and put both hands over her mouth and started crying. Real crying, ugly crying, the kind you can't fake. And I've thought a lot about whether it was real, and I still think on that day it probably was. That's what makes this whole thing so hard to be clean about. We drove into town in a tricycle, me folded up in that little sidecar with my knees at my chin. And I looked out at the boulevard along the sea, Rizal Boulevard they call it, families out walking, kids selling peanuts, the ferry lights out on the water going over to Cebu, and I thought, this is it. This is where the second half of my life happens. I'd been in the country 40 minutes. I'd brought a whole suitcase of what she'd called pasalubong. Gifts, that's the custom. You don't come empty-handed. You bring things for everybody. Chocolate from the duty-free, a bottle of good bourbon for nobody in particular, corned beef and Spam because she said her mother loved the American kind, little things for the cousins. I hadn't understood yet that this was a rule, not a kindness, that a balikbayan, somebody coming home from abroad, is expected to arrive loaded down like a pack mule, and that I was going to be arriving loaded down for the rest of my life. That first time it just felt like Christmas, handing it all out, everybody so pleased. I didn't know I'd signed a contract. They put me up not in a hotel but at her mother's house, up in the barangay, and that's where I learned what family means over there. And it wasn't a lie exactly, it was just so much bigger than I understood. The mother, Nanay Belen, cooked for 2 days straight. There were aunts and uncles and cousins I couldn't keep track of, kids everywhere, a rooster tied to a mango tree, a basketball hoop nailed to a coconut palm. They fed me lechon and this sour soup called sinigang, and I ate till I hurt, And everybody laughed at how much the big American could eat. And I laughed too. I felt held. After 2 years of funerals and an empty kitchen in Ohio, I felt held. One afternoon that first visit, she took me down to the boulevard for merienda, the little meal in the middle of the afternoon they do, and we sat at a place that sold this thing called Sylvanas and drank Halo, which is shaved ice with beans and fruit and ice cream all thrown together. Sounds terrible. Tastes like heaven when it's 100 degrees out. And a couple of little kids came up selling sampaguita, these tiny white flowers strung on a thread, and I bought every string the kid had. Must have been 10 of them. 30 pesos apiece. Nothing. And I hung them all around Marilu's neck till she was laughing and swatting at me. And an old woman at the next table watched us and said something to Marilu in Visayan, and Marilu went shy and wouldn't translate. And finally she said, "The Lola says you'll take care of me." That the old woman could see it in how I was. And I felt about 10 feet tall. I didn't think, not for 1 second, that a woman who wanted to read a rich foreigner might have arranged for me to feel exactly, precisely that, in exactly that spot, at exactly that moment. I'm not saying she did. I'm saying I've had 4 years to wonder, and wondering about every sweet memory is its own kind of tax you pay forever. And Marilu, in the evenings, we'd sit on the concrete step and watch the fireflies come up out of the sugar cane, and she'd put her head on my shoulder and not say anything, and for a shy man who'd spent his whole life not knowing what to do with his hands, that silence was the finest thing I'd ever been given. Somewhere in those 3 weeks, the daughter started calling me Papa Clyde. Nobody told her to, or so I thought. And that was the day I stopped being a tourist. That was the day, in my heart, I moved there. Everything after that was just paperwork and money, and I gave both away with a smile on my face. I want to be fair to them, and to myself, so let me tell you what made it feel real, because if it had felt like a scam, I'd have run. I'm not completely soft in the head. It felt real because they let me see the hard parts. Nobody hid the poverty from me to keep me dreaming. They showed me. The house had a roof that leaked in the rainy season, and they caught the water in buckets. Nanay Belen had these terrible bouts with her gallbladder, and there'd be a night of it, her doubled over, and no money for the hospital. And I saw that with my own eyes. It wasn't a story on a phone screen. Marilu's brother, Boy, a good-natured kid in his 20s, couldn't get steady work, just did odd jobs and drove somebody else's tricycle for a cut. This was a family working themselves to the bone and staying poor no matter what. And I had $160,000 sitting in a bank in Ohio, doing nothing but making me feel guilty. And I want to tell you about the good in it, too, because if I only tell you the bad, you'll think I'm a bigger fool than I am, and you won't understand why any man stays. There was a night that first long visit, a brownout, the power going out, which happens all the time out in the province, and the whole barangay went black and hot and the fans died, and instead of everybody being miserable, they all just drifted out into the yard with candles and a guitar. Boy played, badly, and the cousins sang, and Nanay Belen told stories in Visayan that Marilu translated between laughing, and somebody grilled fish over coals, and I sat on a plastic stool under more stars than I'd seen in my life, and thought, Ohio never gave me 1 hour like this, not one, in 50 years. These people had nothing, a leaking roof and a sick mother and no money, and they knew how to be happy in a way I had never once managed with all my savings. That's not a scam. You can't fake a thing like that. That was real, and it's the realness that made everything after it possible. You see how it goes. It's not that they tricked me into thinking they needed help. They genuinely needed help. That part was true. What I couldn't see was where genuine need ended, and where I became a resource to be managed. There's a word for it over there I learned much later. Discarte. It means resourcefulness, hustle, figuring out how to get by, and it can be an admirable thing in a poor country. It can also be pointed straight at you, and you can't tell which one it is, because it wears the exact same face as love. The first real number came about a month after I flew home. Nane Belin's gallbladder finally put her in the hospital in Dumaguete, and it was an emergency operation, and the bill was going to be something like 140,000 pesos before they'd even wheel her in. That's around $2,500. Marilu called me sobbing, said the doctor wouldn't start till they paid a deposit, said her mother was going to die on a bench in the hallway. And what am I going to do? Say no? Let a woman I've eaten dinner with die over $2,500 I've got sitting in the bank? I sent it that same hour through the bank, wired it, and I sat up all night in Ohio waiting to hear. And in the morning she sent me a photo of Nane in a hospital bed with a thumbs up and a tube in her arm, and everybody in the comments of the family group chat was thanking me and thanking God, and I felt 10 feet tall. There's a thing over there called utang na loob. It means a debt of the inside. A debt of gratitude, a thing you owe somebody who helped you that you can never fully pay back, and it runs their whole society. It's beautiful in its way. You help somebody, and they carry that, and someday they help you. But here's what took me years to see. When you're the foreigner, the Kano, the rich American, that debt only ever seems to run one direction. I was forever the one giving, and they were forever the ones grateful, and grateful is a lovely thing to be around. It feels like love. It looks exactly like love. But a debt that only goes one way isn't utang na loob. It's just a faucet. And I was the faucet. And I mistook the sound of running water for the sound of being needed the way a husband is needed. There's a difference. I paid $150,000 to learn the difference. Here's the thing I've had to sit with. I never saw a real hospital bill. Not one itemized page. It might have been $140,000. It might have been 40 and the rest went who knows where. I'll never know, and that's the poison of it. I still don't know which memories were real. But at the time, I never even thought to ask. Asking would have felt like calling them liars over a dying woman. The fiesta was the next one. And this one I understand better now. Every barangay has its Saint's Day, its fiesta, and it's a point of pride. You cook for the whole neighborhood, you show your worth. And it came out, gently, over a few calls, that this year they wanted to do it big because the American was practically family now. It would look good. It would honor me, they said. And it ran, all told, close to 60,000 pesos by the time you counted the pig, and the sound system, and the beer, and the tables, over $1,000 for one afternoon. I paid it happy. There's video somewhere of me sat at the head of a table under a tarp, red-faced, a San Miguel in my hand, 40 people I was related to by nothing but money singing at me, and God help me, I have never in my life been happier than in that video. That's the truth. I was buying a family, and it was the best money I ever spent, right up until it wasn't. By then I was flying over every few months, staying longer each time. 30-day tourist visa extended and extended. And the little drips never stopped between visits. The medicine, the fares, the daughter's tuition at a little Catholic school, Boboi's this and that. Call it 25,000 pesos a month by now, 450 a month steady, and I never blinked. I'd stopped converting it in my head. That's when you know you're in trouble, when you stop doing the math. And all through it, Marilu never once asked me to move there. She was too smart for that. She just built a life so warm around me every time I visited that going back to the gray and the quiet in Ohio started to feel like a punishment I was choosing. So one visit, sitting on that concrete step watching the fireflies, I said it myself. I said, what if I just didn't go back? And she cried again and said she'd been praying I'd say it, but she'd never have asked, because she didn't want me to think she was after, well, after exactly what she was after. But I couldn't see that yet. I'd said it myself, hadn't I? That was the whole trick. They never had to push me anywhere. They just made the water warm and let me swim in deeper on my own. So I went home to Ohio one last time and I cut the rope. I sold my truck. I gave my tools to a young fellow on the crew, 30 years of good tools, just handed them over. I told the boss I was done. And when he asked where I was headed, I finally told the truth and watched his face do a thing I've never forgotten. Not surprise. More like pity. Like he'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. I closed out accounts. I said goodbye to maybe 4 people, because that's all I had. The last night in that house, I slept on the floor, because I'd already sold the bed. Sold everything. The house was just an echo and a few boxes I was shipping and me in a sleeping bag on the carpet where I'd learned to walk. And I lay there, and part of me, some old animal part, was screaming, "Don't do this. You don't know these people. You've known her 18 months. And you've spent maybe 9 weeks in the same country as her." And I told that voice to shut up. I actually said it out loud in the dark, told my own good sense to shut its mouth, because being sensible had gotten me 50 years of eating over a sink. And where was sensible when my mother apologized on her deathbed for how alone I was? To hell with sensible. That's the thought I fell asleep on. To hell with sensible. I have never in my life been more wrong about anything, and I've never understood a wrong feeling better. And I got on a plane with 2 suitcases and about $155,000 left to my name, and I did not once look back out the window. I meant to never go back. I said it to everyone who'd listen. I'll never go back. I had no idea I was making it true in the worst possible way. Now the money starts moving in the big amounts, and this is the part where you're going to want to reach through the screen and shake me. Go ahead. I've done it to myself plenty. The plan, and it was presented to me as our plan, was to build a house. Not rent, build. Our own house, on family land, up in the barangay near Nanay Belen, so we'd all be together. And I wanted it. God, I wanted it. A home. I hadn't had one since my mother died. The idea of a house with my name on it, kids running around, was the entire reason I'd come. Except my name couldn't be on it. That's the first wall you hit over there, and any honest person will tell you inside a week, a foreigner cannot own land in the Philippines. Full stop. It's in their constitution. I could own a condo in a building, maybe, but not land, not a house on land, not a scrap of that hillside. So how does a foreigner build his dream house? Well, everybody's got a workaround, and every workaround is a way for you to pay for something you'll never own. Ours was this. The land would be a lot carved off her family's property, and since I couldn't hold title, the title would go in Marilou's name. And I'd pay for the lot to be surveyed and titled proper. That was 1.5 million pesos by the time the surveyor and the fixers and the barangay were all paid. Call it $25,000. And it would be hers on paper but ours in life, because we were going to be married. That was always the sentence that closed every conversation. Because we're getting married. Once your annulment comes through, I'd say, and she'd nod and look sad, and I let it go. I did talk to a lawyer. I want that on the record, because people think men like me do none of this. I sat in an office in Dumaguete with a Filipino attorney, and I asked him straight, "Is this safe?" And he told me the truth, actually. He did. He said the safest thing is a long-term lease in my own name over the land, 25 years, renewable, so that even if things went bad, I'd have a legal right to be there. He was a decent man, that lawyer, and I think about him more than about almost anybody. Middle-aged, glasses, a little office over a hardware store with an aircon unit dripping into a coffee can and a framed photo of his own kids on the desk. He didn't want my money. Not really. He charged me a small consultation fee and tried to save me $60,000, which is the opposite of a scam. He drew it on a piece of paper for me. He drew the land, and he drew a box that said, "Lease with my name in it, 25 years, renewable another 25. And he said, "This box protects you, Clyde. Even if you and the lady part ways, this box means no one can put you off this land. You have a right, you can sell your interest, you are a person in the eyes of the law and not just a visitor." And then he drew the other way, the title straight into her name. And he didn't even put a box around it. He just wrote her name on the land and looked at me over his glasses and said, "And this way, sir, you own a memory." That's what he said. "You own a memory." He said, "Do not simply put it in her name and trust." He said it plainly. And I heard him. And then I went home, and Marilou cried and said a lease meant I didn't trust her, that after everything I'd still treat her like a stranger, and Nane Belen wouldn't hear of some legal paper cutting up the family land. It was an insult. And I folded. I folded because I was afraid of losing the warmth. I paid the lawyer his fee and ignored every word he'd said. That one decision cost me more than all the rest combined. Not the money. The leg to stand on. The house was 2.8 million pesos, $50,000. 2 stories, concrete, tile floors, a real kitchen, a water tank on the roof, a wall around it with broken glass set in the top the way they do. I paid it out in stages to a cousin who was a contractor. Of course, the contractor was a cousin, and every stage there was an overrun, more rebar, cement went up. The truck couldn't get up the road, so they had to carry it. And every overrun I paid, another 300,000 here, 200 there. And here's the bitter joke of it, given my trade. I spent 31 years building things for other people, and the one time I built something for myself, I built it for somebody else too. I was out there every day of that build, in my element for the first time since I'd landed, showing the boys how to brace the formwork proper, arguing with the cousin contractor about the rebar spacing because he was skimping, and I could see it, sweating through my shirt by 7 in the morning. I loved it. I'd point up at the second floor going in and think, "That's mine. I made that. 31 years, and I finally get to point at a wall." It never once crossed my mind that pointing at a wall and owning a wall are 2 entirely different things. A dog can point at a wall. I had built my own beautiful prison, and I was proud of the brickwork. By the time it topped out with the finishing, and the furniture and the appliances, it was closer to 3.5 million pesos all in. $60,000 odd in a house that was legally, completely, 100% hers. And I wasn't done. Because a family needs an income, not just a house, so we started a little business, a sari-sari store built into the front of the property, and a small piggery out back. Pens and feed and a dozen pigs. 500,000 pesos, $9,000 to set up. Boboy needed his own tricycle to make money instead of driving another man's, so 160,000 for that, near $3,000. The store lost money from the day it opened because half the neighborhood bought on utang, on credit, and you can't say no to family, and the pigs got sick. All of it a hole I kept filling. I need you to hear the total because I didn't add it up till it was far too late. The lot, the house, the store, the pigs, the tricycle, the hospital, the fiesta, the monthly support that never stopped, my own living. The visa runs to Cebu every couple months to keep me legal. By the time I'd been in the country about 2 years, I had spent something north of $140,000. I'd flown in with 155. I had maybe 15,000 left. And I owned nothing. Not the land, not the house, not the store, not the truck under my brother-in-law. Nothing on this earth had my name on it except the passport in my pocket and the debt I felt I owed these people for loving me. And that's about when the warmth started going out of the house like somebody'd left a door open. The cracks. Let me tell you about the cracks, because they came slow, the way rust comes. It's not one big moment. I keep wanting to give you one big moment because that's how stories go, but it wasn't like that. It was 100 small subtractions. It was that she stopped putting her head on my shoulder in the evenings. It was that the fireflies came up out of the cane the same as ever, and she'd be inside on her phone. It was that when I reached for her, she'd find a reason. She was tired, her stomach, the daughter might wake. And a man can go a long time telling himself his woman is just tired. Years. You'd be amazed. It was that the good morning texts, the ones that had started the whole thing, the ones where she asked if I was eating enough, those had quietly stopped sometime, and I couldn't even tell you when. I only noticed the way you notice a clock's stopped. Not at the moment it stops, but some random hour later when you happen to look, and the hands are wrong. Marilu started being gone. Overnight to the city for seminars, at the drugstore chain she didn't even work at anymore. Her phone got a lock code it never had before and turned face down on the table. And when I asked, gentle, why the code, she got a hardness in her voice I'd never heard. She said in the Philippines a wife has some privacy, and I said we're not married. And the second it left my mouth I saw it land, and she said, quiet, cold. And whose fault is that? Like the annulment was mine to fix. And maybe by then, with my money, it was supposed to be. Because here's the annulment. I'd been putting money toward it for over a year by then. 500,000 pesos, $9,000, handed over in pieces to a lawyer in Cebu I never once met or spoke to, always through her, always a new delay. The judge, the paperwork, her estranged husband couldn't be found to be served. Then he could be found but wanted paying off. Then a new lawyer. $9,000, and she was exactly as married as the day I met her. And without that annulment I couldn't marry her. And without marrying her I had no claim to a house I'd built with my own dead parents' money. I started to see the shape of it then, just the outline, and I did what I'd done my whole life when a hard thing was in front of me. I looked away. I didn't want it to be true, so I decided it wasn't. What broke it open was the expat bar. There's a spot in Dumaguete, down a side street off the boulevard, a little open front bar with plastic chairs where the foreigners drink, the Americans and the Aussies and the odd German, the sunburnt old boys who've been there 20 years. I'd avoided the place. I thought I was better than it, honestly. I wasn't some sad old Kano propping up a bar. I had a family. But this one evening, low, needing to be around anybody who spoke like me, I wandered in and ordered a red horse and got to talking with a few of them. And when I told them where my house was, the barangay, the family name, the whole table went quiet in a way I felt in my stomach before I understood it. An old Australian named Ron, been there 22 years, put his beer down and said, "Mate, sit down." And he was already sitting, so I knew it was bad. You have to understand who these men were, because I'd have crossed the street to avoid them a year before. The sunburnt old boys at the expat bar, the ones who've been in the islands 20, 30 years, nursing a beer at 2 in the afternoon and grumbling about the country that they refused to leave. I thought they were bitter losers. I thought they were exactly what I was never going to become. And the terrible thing I found out that night is that they weren't bitter for no reason. They were bitter because every single one of them had been where I was sitting, some of them more than once, and they'd been trying to warn men like me for 2 decades and watching us not listen, watching us look down our noses at them the way I had, and then watching us turn up at that same bar 18 months later with the same gray face I must have been wearing. Ron had a phrase for it. He said, "We're not bitter, mate. We're just early. You're only a few years behind us, that's all. Sit down." They didn't gloat. That's what got me. They were kind about it, which was worse. Ron told me there were 3 other houses he knew of in that same cluster of barangays, built the same way, by an Englishman and 2 other Yanks, all of them titled in the woman's name, all of them built on the promise of an annulment that never came. He said the annulment scam was practically an industry. A woman conveniently still married can keep a foreigner paying forever, because he can't marry her, and he can't leave without losing everything. And the lawyer's often a cousin, and the money for the annulment just goes round the family and back into the ground. He asked me if I'd ever met the Cebu lawyer. I said no. Nobody at that table was surprised. And then a quieter fella, an American named Dale, asked me the daughter's father's name, the estranged husband. And when I said it, he and Ron looked at each other, and Dale said, "Real careful, that a man by that name still came around that barangay, that he'd been seen at the house, that the whole village knew him, that maybe he wasn't quite as gone as I'd been told, and maybe the reason the annulment never happened was that nobody in that family actually wanted it to." I don't remember paying for the beer. I remember walking back along the boulevard in the dark with the sea on my left, and the karaoke, and the tricycles, and the whole warm, loud world I'd bought my way into, and understanding for the first time that I'd been inside it the way a fish is inside a net. I didn't confront her clever. I wish I could tell you I laid a trap. I just came in and asked her flat if her husband still came to the house. And she didn't cry this time. That was how I knew. The crying had always been for when she needed something. This time she went cold and hard and turned it around on me faster than I could stand up. How dare I listen to bitter old drunks at that bar? How dare I accuse her after everything her family had done for me? Did I know what people would say? Was this the thanks? And on, loud, until the neighbors could hear, until saving face meant I was the villain who'd shamed a good woman in her own home. The home I'd paid for, that her name was on. And underneath all the noise, she never once said the words. She never said, "No, he doesn't come here." Not once. I noticed that later, lying awake. She defended everything except the actual fact. There was a moment in the middle of all that shouting, though, that I keep. She stopped, just for a second, out of breath from yelling, and something crossed her face that wasn't anger and wasn't calculation. It was just tired. Bone tired. And she said, quieter. Not for me, really. More to herself. You don't know what it is to be poor. And she was right, I didn't. I'd been broke, plenty, but broke in America with a trade and a truck is not poor in a barangay with a leaking roof, and a sick mother, and a daughter, and no man and no way out. I've thought about that sentence more than any other thing she ever said to me. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession. But it was the truest thing in the whole 4 years. And it's the reason I can't hate her clean, much as it would ease me to. She did to me what a drowning person does to the one who swims out to save them. She climbed on top of me to keep her own head up, and she pushed me under to do it. And I don't know that I wouldn't do the same in her shoes. I really don't. I went to a fixer the next week and paid to have the title checked, an actual copy pulled. It was real, that much. A real title. In her name. And I found her mother's name, too. A joint thing on the land I'd never been shown, never signed anything about, never had one syllable of legal standing over. $50,000 of house sitting on $25,000 of dirt, and I was, in the eyes of the law of that country, a guest. A guest they could ask to leave any morning they chose. And once I'd shamed them at that bar, the mornings got colder fast. I want to be honest about the bottom, because I think the bottom is the only part of this that might actually help somebody. It didn't end in a screaming match or a police report. Those endings are for people who have a claim. I had none. It ended slow and quiet and humiliating, the way you'd ease an old dog out the door. There got to be more people in the house. Beauboy moved in with a girlfriend, an uncle. Then, one week, a man I didn't know sleeping in the front room, and nobody explained him, and I understood without being told that this was the husband, or near enough, and that I was now the guest and he was moving toward being the resident, and the whole thing had turned over while I slept in the master bedroom I'd paid for. Marilou barely spoke to me. When she did, it was about money. One more emergency, one more push for the annulment that we both now knew was theater. And I said no, finally. First time in 4 years. I said no. And within a month, the temperature in that house told me plain that a foreigner who's stopped paying is a foreigner who's leaving. Nobody threw me out. They just stopped setting a place for me at the table and let the silence do the work, and a shy man knows better than anyone how loud a silence can be. I packed the 2 suitcases I'd come with. The daughter, she was 10 by then, and I did love that kid. That was as real as anything in me. She hugged me at the gate and asked when Papa Clyde was coming back, and I couldn't answer her, and I still can't. That's the one that gets me at 3 in the morning. Not the money. Her. I sat down, and I added it all up. Finally, the whole 4 years, every wire and every Gcash and every stage payment on the house. It came to right around $150,000. I'd arrived with 165. I had, when the dust settled, a little under $4,000 in the world, and a room I was renting by the week down near the boulevard. A plywood room with a fan, 51, 55 now, years old, single, quiet, eating over the sink. Right back where I started in Ohio, except now the sink was in the tropics, and my dead parents' house was gone and there was no crew, no diner, no country to go home to, because that's the joke, isn't it? I'd said I'd never go back, and now I can't. Not the way you're thinking. I've got a passport, I could buy a ticket if I scraped it, but there's nothing there. I sold it all. The house I grew up in belongs to strangers. My tools belong to a young man on a crew that's forgotten me. I've got no home, no work at my age with these knees, and not enough money to start over in a country as expensive as America. I burned that bridge myself, on purpose, with a smile, 4 years ago, and the water's too wide now to swim. So I stay. Broke in paradise, which is its own particular kind of prison they don't put on the retire abroad videos. I'll tell you what a day looks like now, because I think the shape of it says more than any number. I get up when the roosters and the tricycles make sleep pointless, which is around 5. I make instant coffee, the 3-in-1 kind in the packet, on a single burner. I walk down to the boulevard when it's still cool, and I watch the fishermen come in, and I sit on the seawall with the old men who've got no place to be either, and we don't talk much, which suits me, always did. Around 10 it gets too hot to be a person, and I go back to the room with the fan. I do a bit of work under the table, cash, helping a Norwegian fella who's building a little place fix his scaffolding so his boys don't kill themselves. 31 years has to be worth something, and it turns out the one skill I've got is the one thing I can't legally be paid for here, so I get paid in beer and groceries, and we both pretend it isn't happening. In the evening I eat, usually at the same little carinderia, pointing at whatever's in the pots, and I go to bed early because there's nothing to stay up for. That's it. That's the retirement. That's the paradise I sold my mother's house to buy. And every so often, not often, I'll get a message from the daughter. She's got her own phone now, 12 years old. She'll just write, "Papa Clyde, are you okay? Are you eating enough?" Her mother's exact words, the exact words that started the whole thing, and I don't know if the girl knows she's saying them or if it's just what the women in that family say to men they want something from. And I can't bear to think it's the second thing, so I choose to think it's the first. I always write back that I'm fine, and I'm eating plenty. And then I put the phone face down on the plywood and I sit there in the dark with the fan going, 55 years old, and I let myself miss her for exactly as long as I can stand it. And then I make myself stop. Now, here's what I won't do. I won't sit here and tell you they were monsters, and I was a saint they robbed. That's the easy story, and it's a lie. The truth is worse and quieter. That family was poor in a way I'd never seen. Poor in a way that makes $150,000 look like a rope thrown to a drowning man, and I was a lonely fool with money and a hole in me the shape of a family, and we found each other, and we each took what we needed. They took my money. I took 4 years of feeling held, of being Papa Clyde, of not eating alone. Was it worth what it cost? No. God, no. But it wasn't nothing, and I won't pretend it was nothing, because pretending it was nothing is just another way of lying about what I did. The mistakes were mine. Everyone. I ignored a lawyer who told me the truth to my face. I put a house in someone else's name because I was afraid to seem like I didn't trust her. I stopped doing the math because the math scared me. I sold the only home I had before I'd secured the new one. I mistook being needed for being loved. And honestly, at 55, I'm still not certain those two things were ever fully separate from Marilou either, and that's the part one'll never get to the bottom of. Maybe she loved me some. Maybe her mother did. Maybe the daughter did, the way kids love whoever's kind to them. And maybe all of that was true at the same time as them draining me dry. Both things. That's the Philippines they don't warn you about. Not the villains, but the ones who love you and use you in the same breath and can't always tell the two apart themselves. If you take one thing from an old scaffolder who lost it all, take this. Don't burn the bridge home until you're standing on solid ground on the other side. And if you can't put your name on it, it isn't yours. No matter how warm the house is or how much the little girl calls you Papa, get it in writing or get out. I didn't. And here I am. That's Clyde's story. And I think you can hear, in the way he tells it, that he's not looking for you to hate anyone. Not her, not that family, not even himself, though he carries plenty of that. He's just laying it down the way it happened, so that maybe one man watching tonight, one lonely man with a little money and a big empty house, hears it in time. He's still in Dumaguete, as far as we know. Still by the boulevard. Still, in his words, unable to go back and unable to fully leave, which might be the most Philippines ending there is. If this reached you, sit with it a minute before you scroll on. And if you're carrying a story of your own, the good kind or the hard kind, put it in the comments, because somebody down there needs to know they're not the only one. Take care of yourselves out there, and take care of each other. This has been Inside the Philippines.